Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2020 International eConference on Interreligious Dialogue. My name is Dr. Darren Slade, and I am the president of the Global Center for Religious Research, which is hosting this year's academic conference. Now, one of the great things about GCRR is that you can attend these academic conferences right from the comfort and safety of your own home without having to worry about hotel fees and travel costs. In fact, you're being joined by students, scholars, and specialists from all over the world right now. And because each of these presentations are video recorded, the information presented here will be available all across the globe for millions of people to see. Now, for those attending live, as you listen to each of the presentations, feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask questions, and our speaker will do their best to answer them at the end of the presentation. With that said, I would like to introduce to you my very good friend and the next presenter, Dr. Neri Ariel. Allow me to share my screen so that I can give a proper introduction. Dr. Ariel's presentation today is on interreligious legal dialogue, the adjudication between Muslims and Jews. Dr. Ariel holds a Kreitman postdoctoral position at the Goldstein-Gorin Department of Jewish Thought at Ben-Gurion University. He obtained his PhD in Talmud and Halakha at Hebrew University. Dr. Ariel recently completed a joint research project as an inter-office collaboration at places like Mentor and Yale University. As a cooperation partner at the Institute of Jewish History in Austria, at the University of Vienna, and at the Austrian Academy of Sciences, he researches Hebrew fragments retrieved from bookbinding, which deepens our understanding of medieval Jewish traditions in Europe. And Dr. Ariel's PhD research focused on his discovery of a hitherto unknown genre within Judeo-Arabic literature named Adab al-Qadi, or etiquette of judgeship. And his interdisciplinary research, called Comparative Judeo-Islamic Legal History, is still an ongoing collaborative project. And with that said, I'll turn it over to my friend, Dr. Ariel. Thank you so much for presenting today. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen. Okay. So, do you see? Can you see? Yes.
Everything looks great.
Fantastic. Too often, one finds explicit or hidden tendencies among scholars in more conservative Jewish circles to reject the idea of any foreign influences or involvement in the pure image of self-identification. Unsurprisingly, this is not unique to scholarship of Judaic studies. Rather, well-respected scholars of Islamic traditions and other traditionalists of legal cultures tend to reject such reciprocal relationships as well. And if there is any influence to be acknowledged, it is presented either as superficial or negligible, or as purely structural. Academic research, however, comes more and more to the recognition that the roots of the monotheistic traditions are deeply intertwined, and that the separation bias stems from a sense of a prima facie cultural supremacy, motivated in fact by the need to protect the local patriotist learned community from the threat of interculturality. Sharing a common cultural sphere would suggest, for many followers of a certain belief, an annulment of the right to theological uniqueness and subversion of the exclusivity centralized legal jurisprudential authority. In this reference, I would like to mention the book of by Ariel Simonson on your screen, Common Justice. This isn't only a modern phenomenon, and just to note that though all those influences are coming together, as you can see, into Islamic law, and from there to Judeo-Islamic law or Judeo-Islamic culture. So this isn't only a modern phenomenon. In the Middle Ages, both in Babylonian and later on in Spanish and Ashkenazi diaspora, fundamental polemics between participants of the three monotheistic religions took place. In Islamic Babylonia, there was a unique institution of a polemical correspondence, namely the Majlis, literally sitting or session, where scholars of the main monotheistic religions, however, not only as atheists and other sectarians were probably also part of the intellectual confrontation, discussed their ideas and attempted to prove theologically and philosophically which among the religions is the right religion, what is negotiable, and which notions must be socially, religiously denied and undermined. Political debates we find in the course of Middle Ages, to mention here the famous disputation of Barcelona between Dominican friar Pablo Cristiani and Nahmanides of the 13th century. Such public debates were probably common to lesser degree in Ashkenaz, where Jews were massively exposed to persecutions and were often forced to religious conversion, though such events also occurred at times under Islam, as one finds, for instance, in Igeret Hashmad to Maimonides. You can see on the screen the book by Mordechai Akiva Friedman, The Yemenite Messiah and Apostasy. The theological fortification of Jewish thought. One second, yes. The theological fortification of Jewish thought was therefore a bit different in character to that of the competing religions. The defense of Jewish belief was the outcome of a vulnerable and threatened reality in which danger played a central role, and the desire for self-justification was motivated by fear of death or deportation. In the Jewish realm, it is impossible to reliably distinguish between sincere interreligious correspondence and self-defense. In all these polemical discussional arenas, we must bear in mind the relative weakness of the Jews politically in an entangled environment that was hostile on more than one front. Examination of the identity requires two kinds of reflection: introspection from a self-identifying perspective and contextual assessment. The context of Jewish history in their diasporic lands require us, therefore, to perceive identity on the backdrop of diasporic culture with extra contextual involture. A cultural identity cannot be grasped without the language, legal system, and a political structure within which the identity moves. Therefore, the Jews of the Maghreb are to be considered as Arab Jews, just as the Yekis were called Germans of Moses' religion, or as we call them in Hebrew, Germanim b'nei dat Moshe. This is not an ethnic or arbitrary element solely. Babylonian Jewry gave precedence to the Judaism that was created in the diaspora, namely to the Jewishness developing out of place. Only in rare cases does the Babylonian Talmud and the Geonim relate authoritatively to their contemporary Palestinian Jewry. Just as the Babylonian Talmud is now being contextualized by scholars in its Persian Sasanian context, the Jewishness of the Geonim and later on is only to be understood on the background of the neighboring culture of Islamic traditions and the pre-Islamic incorporations that penetrated in early Islam. Likewise, other Jewish diasporas in the course of history must be investigated not only from their own writings and internal culturality, but rather against their environmental background for instance, of Iberian history in Sepharad, or Ashkenaz as a cultural, as a Central European culture, and so forth. Even in the modern political state of affairs, it is not superfluous to mention that the question of Jewishness was in many contexts separate from the Zionist question or from the land of Israel as a geographical space with physical borders, politically as far as it could be. On the other hand, Jewishness as an outer identification was manipulated by some others for anti-Semitic and morally inappropriate and unacceptable purposes and terrorization. The desire to Zion, however, always present in the Jewish consciousness as a central motif. And here I refer not only to the rabbinical Judaism, but also to Karaite and other later streams of Judaism. The Jews left their ancient sacred land and were missing it in their liturgical prayers, Torah learning, etc., in their diasporic destinations. The destruction of the temple and the exile from Zion revolutionized enormously Jewish identity as an out-of-place diasporic one, and the yearning to primality became therefore predominant in the design of the national mind as transcendental of its actual geographic context. As this identity in its diasporic contexts was subordinated to the surrounding cultures, its subjugation becomes a dominant component of its self-identification. This component of identity is standing in a clear contradiction with the closeness of the nation to God and raises the question of abandonment of the Israelites, ecclesia et synagoga. This theological existential question was giving fascinating excuses, especially during and after the Shoah, the Jewish Holocaust, but these only emphasized the entanglement of the self and identification, then the need for interreligious redefinition, incompatibility with new periodical challenges in a challenging reality of time and place. It is not to wonder that many of the great scholars of Arabic culture in the 19th century were of Jewish origin due to the common basis of these two religions. Shlomo Dov Goitain, in his vast Geniza studies, especially in his article on the Israeliyat, but also in many other publications regarding Judeo-Arabic literary relationships, showed, based on Ignaz Goltzia, Moritz Steinschneider, and other scholarship, that these cultures are inseparable sister cultures, and that in different levels and stages of their developments, both these monotheistic traditions culturally adopted and integrated components of each other reciprocally, however, mostly without referring to or leaving hints of the original borrowed sources used. This basic idea was further developed by Chava Lazarus Yaffe, Gidon Leibson, and by other legal comparativists who thought the Jewish halacha to have borrowed great parts of it from the Arabic culture, language, and law. Although it is harder to prove that substantive law was deeply influenced by the Islamic law schools, some preliminary steps have been made also in this field of research, mainly checked the connections between the Geonic halacha or Maimonides with their Islamic contemporaries. In my completed dissertation work and in my forthcoming habilitation, Le Doctorat d'État, I would like to argue that the relationships are much greater and deeper than that of borrowing a specific halacha rule or halachic rule or body of laws. Rather, Jewish and Islamic medieval jurisprudence are to great extent dependent on each other, and the canonization of law, both substantive and procedural law, is interwoven. Not because one scholar borrowed laws from the other religions, what very plausible to say in several cases, but because the whole field was shaped thematically in a similar way that testifies to cross-pollination. The sources of law, though different in character, Sunnah, as you see on the screen, Sunnah and Hadith versus Mishnah and Midrash, have similar functions in Islam and Judaism, and its hermeneutics shows thematical similarity. Ijtihad and Usul al-Fiqh versus 13 Midot and Darkei Limud Upsika generally, namely methods of derivational adjudication in scriptural interpretation. Processes of idealization and abstraction took place more or less concurrently, both in Sharia and Halacha. Otherwise, there is no real explanation for the disposable appearance of developed Islamic traditions of established and well-developed legal schools, and simultaneously or little later, huge growth of a monographic genre within Jewish halacha. Now, I would like to share with you my own discovery about this, and what we find in the Islam is like we have in the Sharia law. We find a genre regarding judges' duties or manuals for judges, as courts were played an integral part of Islamic system and the Sharia state now or Islamic state. Now, we find these kind of works both in the Sunnah or in the Shia, and there's a bunch of works about Adab al-Qadi or Adab al-Mufti, which are basically literally Adab is a culture and Qadi is the judge, and these are basically manuals for judges or ethical manuals for judges. Now, what my research for doctoral studies found is that we find in the Geniza a bunch of works. The Geniza was, just to cut clear its long story short, the Geniza was in the synagogue of Ibn Ezra, and there was Jews thrown their writings, their halachic writings for ages, basically so until the 19th century. Now, in this huge storage, they found about 250,000 manuscripts that are. This is the most important discovery of Jewish traditions, and these works have basically the most important contribution of this storage is that new works are being discovered through this. Among them are also the works which are monographic works regarding adjudication. Now, in my dissertation work, I succeeded to divide between several works, and the main work is by Rav Hai Gaon of the 10th century, and from his monographic work, I succeeded to, let's say, to build a skeleton and to find among Geniza from one piece to another. I succeeded to build a new picture of this book, which was not existing before. And so we do have basically a new book, or let's say, a new book, a new old book, a reconstructed book, and which actually reflects on a whole genre, which is a subgenre of Islamic traditions within the Judeo-Arabic traditions. Now, this genre also it's not only a Rabbinite tradition or genre, but rather there is a Karaite branch of this genre. To mention here only two works. One of the works is by Binyamin ben Moshe al-Nahawandi, and the other one is Kitab al-Murshid of Samuel ben Moses al-Maghribi. Yes, so to move back to the main idea and to conclude, in a personal conversation, Professor Powers from Cornell University emphasized that Christian traditions, as you saw in the very beginning of this presentation, mainly of Syriac academies, played a crucial part in the emergence of early Islamic legal traditions. It is worth mentioning here that Ahl al-Kitab were categorically separated within Ahl al-Dhimma, as Christians and Jews under Islamic conquer enjoyed a special privilege. This crossroad of reciprocal relationships is an essential point for our understanding of the mixture of Mediterranean traditions, as Muslim traditions were influenced at their very beginning by Jewish and Christian traditions. As Hubert Kaufold, Christian Müller, Matthew Tillier, Lev White, and others have already proposed, early Islamic traditions inhaled and integrated available traditions of the Mesopotamian environment and rearranged the world of scientific knowledge within the framework of Islam. The framework itself was taken by the Geonim and reshaped the Jewish halacha. The rearrangement of law into legal codices is not an inconsequential matter. From the early codification of the halacha, one shall conclude that not only adjudication, but rather a jurisprudential attitude towards the writings of religion is here to be considered. No more an anonymous and unidentified collective of erudite traditions, rather an author with a personality and codificatorial creativity. These authors, on the one hand, belonged to a specific madhab, but on the other hand, were authoritative and responsible for their own legal compilations. The individualization of legal codices and the personalized and well-organized authoritative authorship takes place more or less concurrently, again, both in Judaism and Islam. To conclude, the conversion and exchanges of ideas isn't a new conceptual framework. However, it serves a theoretical model of how contrasting and even enemy cultures are fundamentally engaged in one another's socio-political history. It goes without saying that no direct actual or practical conclusions are to be derived from these acknowledgements. And of course, my discussion has no intention to offer any solution to burning political conflicts. However, research-informed insight into self-definition, which is not dependent of the neighbor culture, suggests the beginning of an interreligious and interdisciplinary contextualized self-understanding. The discovery of culturally involved identification requires a patient and processual journey towards tolerant enlightenment and merciful reflection. Greater Greater recognition of the compound and complex identities of both sides would bring us towards a more self-aware understanding and potential for reconciliation between conflicted nations. An exalted idea of a salam shalom identity would be part of a still incomplete self-awareness of being in the otherness. Thank you very much.
Dr. Ariel, thank you so much for that presentation. It's extremely enlightening, but also very, very exciting, some of the research that you've discovered with this. Tell us a little bit about how you even came about the discovery, and what did you find anything surprising, and why hasn't this been discovered before?
Okay, so this is the question, it's a circled question, because after we discover something, it raises the question why it was not there before. Now, I must say something about the capacities that are, or the tools that you have to use while you're actually researching this literature. It is basically, you have to understand Jewish law generally, and to know to read Arabic very well, and this kind of, and also, like, it's a historical philological work, and also a legal work, and so it contains also philosophical work, so it brings together many fields under one roof. So it is very hard to make these steps, and this well, I hope to have succeeded in to do some steps in this, although not all the parts of the book of Rav Hai Gaon. I'm sorry, I've not shared. My screen is not shared. I could share it again. Just to come back to this, can you hear me or see the presentation again? Yes.
Yes, I can see it.
Yes. Okay. Good. So to come back to these works, only very few fragments of the book by Samuel Ben Hophni were discovered. In the book of Rav Hai Gaon, like a few dozens of fragments, but after going through hundreds of fragments, and it's a very Sisyphical work. It's a very it's a labor. It's very hard to do this work. So and I'm not yet in the end. So I just submitted my manuscript to the publisher, and I got some notes, and I have to correct and to send it back, and it's a lot of work. So
yeah, I can imagine.
This is about the Rav Hai Gaon. But this is not the whole genre. It's only a fractal of many other books. To mention here as well, we have here the opportunity to mention the book of Ibn Aqnin, which is also a part of this genre. Well, a part of his book is a part of this genre, and also a forthcoming article by me about Rav Yehuda Chalas, which is also wrote Fasl fi Adab Dayanin, which is another chapter on judges' duties from, well, in this case, Spain, later in Spain. So this genre is crossing geographical borders and also historical period. Like it's a historical genre which goes from Babylonian to Ashkenaz, because we find it in Moscow briefly, and also in Spain. And yeah, it's but this is a different talk. from what I wanted to emphasize today.
Sure, of course. Would it be fair to summarize your presentation as saying that Arabic and Jewish cultures, they're sister cultures, and that they have such a strong overlap and interdependence on each other that to engage in interreligious dialogue, you ought to, and to adjudicate legal disputes even, we ought to focus on what you two have in common, what the two cultures have in common. And
Yeah.
is that fair to say?
Yes. So um, to repeat again, Shlomo Dov Goitheim's Israeliyat idea. So this is a reciprocal sister cultures. So it influenced each other in different times and places. And so, first of all, the Islam took sources of Judaism and rearranged them, and then afterwards Judaism took from Islam back. So it's these are quite complex reciprocal relationships. But yes, I do agree about that about this statement. Yes.
That makes perfect sense. So, and do me a favor, you can stop sharing your screen. That way we can see a
Yes,
larger version of you.
yeah, yes, exactly. I wanted to. Oh, now I see you on a
There
full
we go.
screen. Yes, yes.
So in this, you say that it's not a new paradigm. Obviously, it's not a new paradigm, a new way of approaching, but what are some of the biggest obstacles that you see with being able to implement this paradigm, both from the Jewish community and from the Muslim community? What are some of the obstacles that will interfere?
So as I mentioned, in a way, um, one of the obstacles would be politics, and because we are not living on the moon, we are living in a very vital reality where conflicts or ideas or like theological systems are basically clashing with each other. And well, this is not in the actual life. These systems are not really connected to their sources, but they are basically they are well. This is part of the problem, that they are not connected, well connected to their sources, and not to their cultural idea, and not to the other identity model that I suggested here today. So this is one of the obstacles that I see clearly, and also uh, I would like to mention something that I always told my students. I think there is something unfair in our reality today, because um, and it's unfair for both sides. So I do not blame here anyone. I just say there is something very depressing in their reality as it stands, as in its current situation, where um, in Israel, let's say, just I do not want to get here too much into politics, but Israel as a representative of Jewishness is being considered as the conqueror nation now, and being by BDS or other groups compared to the Nazis even. So and the Arabs here are, and the Israelis are feeling the same. So the whole conversation is very overloaded with political tension and like big obstacles which are not really connected to our sources or to anything like that. Now, having said that, I think that there is a potential for something else, and the past can teach us also something for the future, because we do see models where Muslims and Jews could speak together and speak with each other, live together, and share ideas uh, because we are not really remote from each other on the theological background, and so yes, and I hope this answers somehow the question, although it is in a way includes many topics. My answer, but yes, it's basically I expected to see other people, so probably I could see the reactions, but now I am not. I cannot see
Well,
my Muslim brothers to to have the confrontation with them as we usually do in interreligious conversations.
right.
So yeah,
Um, no, and you're bringing up a great point, though. The situation is just far more nuanced and far more complex, especially when we involve politics into it. So it is a great ideal to be able to say we're sister cultures and we can get along better than this. That's a great ideal until neither side or some factions within both sides don't want to hear it, and they have an agenda or some kind of a political motivation for resisting this. Um,
yeah.
I appreciate it. So my last question then, what about the paradigm itself? So you talked about some of the obstacles in both cultures, but what about the paradigm itself? Is there anything in the paradigm that kind of needs to be updated for the 21st century, or something about the paradigm that just won't really actually work in real life?
So maybe to complete my last comment, um, the problem in Israel nowadays, how I see that is that Jews, or basically not all of them, of course, but let's say Arabs can speak Hebrew very fluently, whereas uh, Israelis or Jewish Israelis are not very familiar with the Arabic. So, and this is for me, uh, and also there is another big issue about the language. Uh, while in according to the law, Arabic is well is being referred as a formal language. It is not really one like that, and there was a big issue about this. And for me personally, as one who really struggled with the Arabic and enjoys Arabic very well and enjoys the cultural richness that the Arabic culture and the Islamic culture has to offer, for me it's a pain basically, because
Mm,
I feel like really want to be more engaged within the Islamic traditions, and there is a gap because and that you cannot really cross, and and this gap really in the actual life uh, blocks you from uh, basically being able to cross the bridge, and and
okay. Yeah, that makes
and this
sense.
and
You,
this is well this is you know this is a I said it in a very in a linguistical way, but it's also a political statement, or it's a political uh, view about the situation, and which saddens me very much. And for me it is kind of an absurd that I could meet my Arab colleagues or Islamic colleagues in Berlin and not meeting them here in Jerusalem, where while we are neighboring cultures. So
interesting.
so
Uh,
this
it,
is a very yeah.
it sounds like so much of the paradigm is dependent on having familiarity with the Arabic language and culture, something that Israelis today don't actually have, or haven't at least taken the time to fully immerse themselves in.
Not only that, I think it's also being able to understand that is not Islam is not fanatic, and most of Islam is a huge movement in the world, where millions, billions, like milliards believers are members of this movement, and not all of them, and actually a very small fraction of them are fanatics and or like holding in fanatic ideas or in extremism, while the majority is not like that, and basically they are delivering ideas or values that Islam has to, and these values are very like have a lot in common with Jewish values or Jewish, let's say, theological and religious system.
Mhm.
So, so
You
this
both
is,
you
yeah,
both are fighting pretty strong stereotypes and pretty strong bad imagery. Um, Muslims are being painted as terrorists, fundamentalists,
yes,
radicals, and Jews being painted as oppressors, occupiers,
yes.
and that is going to be a hindrance to this. Dr. Ariel, I really appreciate your presentation and sharing your latest research with us. I think it's, like I said before, it's just exciting stuff. And I'm really excited to see if in the future ways that you guys can implement this paradigm to help further interreligious dialogue and collaboration between the two groups. So thank you so much for this. I do want to go ahead and close out the presentation. I'll give you the final word here in just a second, but I want to say thank you to everybody who did come into an attendance today, and let you know we do have a full day of presentation, so I hope I see you at the other ones. But thanks for coming out and supporting us. And Dr. Ariel, I'll give you the final word, sir.
Yeah, so I do not have much to add, more than great thanks to the organization, and for these really so pleasant and introduction, and so generous opportunity to submit and present the lecture and the research. So thank you so very much for this generous opportunity, and I hope to hear back from you soon.